Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Stevenson. I've asked Bernard Rowe. He's the CEO and Managing Director of Ioneer. ASX code is INR. Now, we've spoken to Bernard in the past, and in fact, it was January of this year where we spoke about the loan agreement and the updates to the project. This is a big project. It's lithium and boron at their Rhyolite Ridge project over there in Nevada, which is where Bernard's coming to me from today. Bernard, great to see you. Goodness me, you've been working really hard on this. There's a few updates I want to talk about. Clearly, it's been a little bit of a tough time for lithium. A lot of people turning around saying, they're kind of going on to the next thing, but it doesn't stop. The fact of the matter is that there is a lithium supply-demand deficit, and we need to get some of these projects underway. So welcome back to Small Caps. Give us, if you like, what's been going on since January. When we last spoke, we spoke about the loan, we spoke about offtake agreements. What's the latest news with Ioneer?
Yeah, thank you, Kerry, and a pleasure to be back on the show with you. And you're right, I'm sitting in Reno right now in our office and have been over here for a few weeks now. So since January, we've been working hard on the permitting process. So we got the green light from the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, late last year to go into what's called the NEPA process. That's approximately a 12-month process. We're well and truly in that at the moment. And so that's taking a lot of our attention, and rightly so. We're working on some other things as well, resource updates and other bits and pieces. But primarily we're focused on getting that final permit and being ready to commence construction next year.
What is you said the NEPA process? Just talk us through that. And you said that you got the green light at the end of last year. And how long is it? What is NEPA? How long is it going to take? And why does it take so long?
Yeah, so firstly, we submit an application for a mining permit, and that's called a mine plan of operation. Our project is on federal land, so we submit that to the Bureau of Land Management, and their process for assessing that application is called the NEPA process, which is the National Environmental Policy Act process. Okay. And so similar in Australia to an EPA. And it goes through that process over a 12-month period generally, and it looks at all aspects of the project, alternatives that, if you're doing building a road in one location or putting an overburden storage in another location or designing your project in a certain way. Well, the NEPA process looks at all the environmental impacts of what you're proposing to do. It examines the alternatives and it assesses the alternatives. And at the end of it, you end up with an updated mine plan of operation that the BLM make a decision on, and that's called a record of decision. And that's the sort of the final decision in that process. And then your mine plan of operation gets approved. Or, of course, or rejected if that's the case, but we're not expecting that with Rhyolite Ridge.
Rhyolite Ridge, if I remember correctly, it's in the desert, isn't it? I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but when you talk about environmental permitting, isn't it in the desert?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the desert. Well and truly, as we've got very low rainfall. Very few people living out here. Very few animals, wild animals. I'm talking about. The land is not used for any agricultural purposes. But I think obviously there's many environmental factors that still apply when you're in the desert. One of them that's really important is water usage, because there are limited water resources. We will rely on groundwater for our water usage at the mine, and so that's a pretty important aspect that you look at. And all of these things are about assessing the impact. And sorry, what I didn't say is before you start the NEPA process, or before the BLM starts the NEPA process, there's at least 2 years of environmental baseline data collection and monitoring that goes on. So we did all of that several years ago. And then there's a sort of a pre-planning period that you go through, which can easily take a year, which we also went through. and then they start the NEPA process. So it is a lengthy process, there's no doubt about it, and that's why we're saying, we're in the final phase of that because we did all that earlier work over the preceding 3 years.
So assuming, and never assume they always say, but I want to assume that all goes well and you get this permit. This is the final permit, isn't it?
Yes, there's 3 key permits that you need to commence construction. There's lots of other minor permits that are more a process, but there's 3 key permits. Air, they relate to air, water, and then the plan of operation. We've already got our air and water permits. They've already been granted to us. Okay. So this is the one that we're waiting on to be able to commence construction.
So once that, again, let's assume that happens and all goes well, and that's when you're expecting that permit. If all goes well, that permit
yeah. So the BLM, they stipulate the timelines for these NEPA processes, and the BLM have said they intend to make a record of decision in January of 2024. So, in about 8 months.
Then that gives you a green light to get on to construction. So I'm kind of wanting a timeline, if you like, of how long construction will take.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, that's correct. With that permit, we would be able to commence construction. Once we're permitted, then of course we have to make a final investment decision from the company, and there's also the DOE loan and the Sibanye contribution to the equity component. So there's a few things to do once we're fully permitted, but we're planning around commencing construction in the first half of next year, and we have a 2-year build period. And okay. So we would be first production in, let's say, mid 2026. And, obviously that's with the caveat that the BLM must permit it first, and then we have to go to our financing partners and get their permission or approvals to proceed, show them that we've met the conditions that are required to access that funding. But the moment we do that, we'll be ready to commence construction straight after.
It leads me very nicely into the Department of Energy loan, which I believe was for $700 million. I got a comment from our last one where it said we didn't dive deep enough into the details of the loan. So perhaps let's do that now and allay any questions about that. So that was awarded to you last year, was it? No, beginning of this year.
It was in January, early this year, correct?
Yeah.
So that's right. So we applied for a loan through what's called the Loan Programs Office, which is part of the Department of Interior. The Department of Energy. Department of Energy, and we applied for that a couple of years ago. We went through an assessment process. Our application was deemed to be complete and compliant. We then went into due diligence, and that took most of last year. So, we did an extensive due diligence process with the Department of Energy as part of that application for a loan. That was an extensive process. They bring in external consultants, experts in various fields, including environmental, by the way, and other things as well, engineering, mining, etc., commercial, we passed that test, and because of that, the Department of Energy then made us a conditional offer for a loan of up to $700 million US. And where does that number come from? They look at the project, they take all the economic inputs that we've provided to them, and they use their own pricing assumptions, their own models, and they come up and say, right, this project, based on their criteria, can support a debt of this amount. So that gives you an indication of the robustness of this project, because the DOE, often acting in a similar way to a bank, would look at a project like this, and they're not going to loan 90% of the funding for a project like this, especially when you've got a company like Ioneer that has a single asset, no cash flow, albeit our partner Sibanye does. Anyway, using a fairly conservative approach, they determined that the project has got the robustness to take on $700 million of debt. Now, the actual terms of that debt, I mean, they are spelled out in some detail in our press release, but and so I won't go through all of it, but some of the highlights are that it's a conditional offer, so we have to meet some conditions before we access that. Of course, the main one is the permitting.
Yeah.
But there are others, and we're working on that, and we don't see any issues with us meeting all of those obligations. But the permitting is the key one. The actual commercial terms, this is a 10-year loan, okay? So, banks often loan, again, for mining projects for terms much shorter than 10 years. It could be, 4, 5 or 6 years, but this is a 10-year loan term. The interest rate will be the US 10-year Treasury rate. So currently somewhere between 4 and 4.5 or 4 and 5%. So it's very low cost of capital, low cost debt, and the loan is drawn in
tranches.
Tranches, yes. Sorry, I'm glad you reminded me of the word.
That's right. I remember last time I couldn't remember a word. So
yeah.
The loan is drawn down as you need it.
You draw it down as you need it. The equity comes in first, and our equity is from our partner, Sibanye, which is $490 million.
Yeah.
So effectively, we've got just slightly under $1.2 billion of US dollars of funding available from the equity that will come from Sibanye and the debt from the DOE. And the tranches will then be fixed, okay? The interest rates are not fixed today, but they will be fixed as we draw it down at the US 10-year Treasury rate, which will be by far the cheapest debt that's available, significantly cheaper, lower cost than anything that would be available through a commercial bank. And obviously, on top of all of that, it's really important for Ioneer that we have as a partner, a funding partner, the US government, the US Department of Energy. And as I said before, they did a lot of due diligence on this project and other projects that they look at. And, it's very pleasing that we've got through that process. And I believe we are still the only mining project with the chemical processing plant beside the mine, so an integrated mine with the chemical processing plant. I believe we are still the only one to have secured that conditional funding from the Department of Energy. So it's a pretty significant milestone for us.
Yeah, that's actually pretty significant as well. And I think that the US are very keen to get their own supply. So I'm sure that there's a little bit of pressure in the background saying, come on, let's make this happen. It's still a process though. But alongside that, Bernard, because I want to make sure we get through everything, last week you announced a resource upgrade, and I've got to say, this is not just an everyday resource upgrade. This is massive. So can you talk us through this upgrade?
Yeah, sure. So in simple terms, the Rhyolite Ridge deposit is like a layered cake, okay? And there's about 5 or 6 layers in the cake. And 2 of those layers have lithium and boron, and 2 of them only have lithium. Now, in the early work that we did in 2016 and 2017, which is when we first started working on this project, we determined that the most attractive layer within this deposit was when you had lithium and boron together. And there were sort of 2 basic reasons for that. One is that the boron was a significant economic contributor. Like at the time, 40% of the revenue would have come from boron at pricing assumptions at that time. It's different now because we were using $6,000 lithium back in 2016. Yeah. But the other part of it was that the fact that the boron was there made this material easier to process compared to your typical Nevada lithium clay deposit. And I won't go into all of that, but it just relates to separating solids and liquids. If you've got this rock that's got the boron in it, it's very easy to leach the lithium and boron out, and it's very easy to wash and filter that afterwards. And you get high recoveries, high water recoveries, and you don't have a lot of solid liquid separation issues. Now, What we found, though, over time, we continued to do some test work on the other layers in the deposit, and we came up with ways that we think we can then commercially extract the lithium from those other layers. Now, one of them is high in clay, but the others, even though they're low in boron, to our surprise, we found that we can easily leach that lithium out as well, even though the boron is absent and the clay is absent. And so, this was a progression over a number of years of testing in the background while we were still focused on the main deposit, which was the high lithium, high boron. And, we had 146 million tonnes of this high lithium, high boron. So we didn't need extra tonnes to make the economics work. This was all about the future beyond the 146 million tonnes. So we'd already drilled this area. It's entirely within the footprint that we're permitting, the project footprint. Okay, so there's no areas outside of that footprint. It's all been drilled. It's in exactly the same area as the 146 million tonnes, but the total tonnes went from 146 million to 360 million. Okay, so you can do the maths on that, but I think it's 145%. I just had to look at my notes. 145% increase in tonnage. But here's the important thing, is that I said that this other mineralisation was high in lithium but low in boron. Well, it happens that it's very high in lithium. In fact, it's even higher in lithium than our, stage one sort of ore body, the boron, lithium boron. And so the amount of lithium contained in the deposit went from 1.2 million tonnes of lithium carbonate equivalent, and we're going to be making lithium carbonate at the site, okay?
Yep.
So it went from 1.2 to 3.4 million tonnes. So the tonnage was 145% increase, but the contained lithium went up to about 168%. And, that makes it, one of the big lithium deposits of the world. And it hasn't been drilled off yet. So it's going to get bigger over time as we do more drilling. So it really does show that, Rhyolite Ridge is going to be a global player in the lithium production and boron. It's going to be a big producer for the United States. It's going to be a cornerstone of the US domestic supply chain, and it's going to grow further. And just to put it into some kind of perspective, because, words are great, but I like numbers as well. So we're going to produce 22,000 tonnes lithium a year in this project. Okay, if we did that for the entire 3.4 million tonnes, then we're talking about 150 years of production. So obviously there is a tremendous opportunity for this project to grow well beyond the 22,000 tonnes per year, because we're not going to be doing that over 150 years. It will ramp up over time. And that quantity of lithium is enough for about 50 million electric vehicles. So it just shows the scale of the deposit and the importance that the deposit is going to play in the electrification of transportation in the United States.
And it is important. It is for the United States. We're running out of time. I think it's important to mention as well, you've got some binding offtake agreements, Tesla, Ford, Toyota, and EcoPro.
That's correct.
And with this expanded resource, will you be looking for more offtake agreements going forward?
Yes, we will. And obviously the three that you mentioned, Ford, Toyota, and EcoPro, of course, all of them and others are asking us, when can we increase production? So, some of it I'm sure will go to our existing customers, and we will obviously also be looking at new customers over time as well. So tremendous growth opportunity for the company and the project based on this resource update.
Okay, Bernard, I need to ask you this. It's been a bit of a tough time over the last 6 months. Share price, there's a beautiful audience of ours out there. They're all investors. They're looking at what the opportunities are. Ioneer has gone through a little bit of a tough time, but so has the whole market. Can you just give us a brief view on where you think you are in that cycle, if you like?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I do think it's a sector, response, and it's all to do with the sort of still a fairly small tonnage market, the lithium market, and so there's always going to be, we're going to undershoot and overshoot the supply demand equation, and when we overshoot, prices are going to soften, and when we undershoot, then we're going to have a shortage of supply and prices are going to fluctuate. So there's going to be that continued volatility for some time. But, look, as I mentioned earlier, when I started on this project in 2016, we were using a $6,000 lithium price and we were stress testing the project at $4,000.
Oh, wow.
Today, people, even though the price of lithium's come off significantly over the last, say, 3 or 4 months, then it's still sitting up around $30,000 and above per tonne. That's the same material that we were using a $6,000 price for only 6 years ago. So the sector is still very, very positive. The outlook's very, very positive. The domestic demand, particularly in the US, second largest car market in the world, very, very minor domestic production, all kinds of incentives through the Inflation Reduction Act and other government funding that is trying to stimulate domestic production. It's an incredible opportunity, and we're extremely well positioned for that. So yes, we've suffered that same downturn in pricing that the rest of the lithium sector, and if I could add to that, the uncertainty around the permitting. I think that's something that has held Ioneer back for a long time, and with the green lighting that I mentioned from the BLM, and now the progression, the timely progression through that NEPA process, I think we're seeing pricing, our share price bottoming, and it's now on the rise, including our NASDAQ listed stock, which has got limited liquidity because we haven't issued any shares over here yet. But we are seeing an upswing in our price, and I think that reflects the progress that we're making around the permitting, and as I mentioned before, the support that we're getting from the US government through the Department of Energy, plus the good work that we've been able to do with the BLM and the US Fish and Wildlife around the permitting as it progresses.
So further, we'll talk again this year, but really, is the focus this year on getting that permitting done? Is that the main thing, that the focus?
It definitely is. We're not going to lose. We're not going to take our eye off that process at all. I mean, that's definitely the priority because above anything else, we want to be starting construction in the first half of next year. But we are comfortable with the way things are progressing. We are comfortable with where we've got to with the engineering. We are comfortable that we're going to be ready to commence construction. And our comfort with all of those things has allowed some of our team some time to then focus on some other things, hence the resource update, and hence you're going to hear from us more about, it's one thing to have the resource, but I think the next obvious question is, well, what are you going to do with that resource? What's your growth strategy? And you're going to hear from us for the rest of this year plenty around our growth strategy, and we've got a tremendous resource to work from. And we intend to demonstrate that we have a plan. It's a robust plan that will allow us to increase that lithium production in the future once we've got the first stage up and running, and that's going to just underpin that critical part or role that we will play in supplying into the US domestic supply chain.
But I think it's also important for people to know that this is not just a mine. They've got the chemical plant next door. So this is that downstream is where there's a lot of added value as well. Did you want to make a comment on that before I wrap this up, Bernard?
I will, and you're dead right. So we're going to make something that's 99% pure lithium. Australia, although we are a major player in the lithium space with, I think, 55-60% of the world's lithium from spodumene. Spodumene concentrates 6% LiO2. We're going to be producing 99% pure material. So it is an integrated hard rock and chemical processing plant we're talking about here. And that's a big factor in the DOE funding and in the agreement that we have with Sibanye, because we're going to be able to do all that value adding here in Nevada.
Yeah, because the majority from Australia goes straight into China to be made into lithium carbonate. What Ioneer is doing, which is a little bit different, is they're going to have the lithium, but they put it through the chemical plant to make lithium carbonate, which is where that sort of that value uplift goes, all staying in the US, which is a massive tick, not only for the government, Department of Energy. I applaud you on sticking with it and making sure that you do everything to the book. But we have run out of time, my friend. 3 reasons why people should be sitting up and taking notice of Ioneer right now.
Permitting is progressing very well, and you're going to see evidence of that as we move along. The growth strategy that I talked about, and you're going to see us, continuing to attract the quality of the partners into the project, like you've seen already. The Department of Energy, Sibanye, our engineering partners. So you're going to see more of that, us aligning ourselves with key players, particularly in the North American US context. So there's plenty of news coming over the next 6 months, no question.
And if you want to see Bernard Rowe, he might be in Nevada now, but he's going to be at the RIU Resources Roundup in Sydney, which happens from the 9th to the 11th of May. So if you want to come along and talk to him directly and ask all the questions that perhaps I haven't asked today, make sure you go to Vertical Events website and register for the Resources Roundup, which is on this week. Talk to you soon. Bernard, I'll see you very soon at the Roundup in Sydney.
Look forward to that, Kerry, and thank you very much.